Hi everyone, I hope you're having a good day. I'm Mim Deshaphaiboon and I'm a designer at Samatthaphap, which is Cadson Demak's visual communication company. So at Samatthaphap, I've been here for about 3 years now, and we do brand identity and logotype design. So we design logos and we draw custom lettering for logotypes like these ones most recently, and we also design visual identities like the one for BITS10 that you see here today. So I haven't met most of you yet, but I've never been to BITS before, so here are some facts about me. I'm Thai, but I studied graphic design in America, and I used to work in San Francisco. I learned type design at the Cooper Union, and I collect type and graphic ephemera. I also collect photographs of type around me, and when I was looking through my collection, I think it makes a pretty good image of the typographic vernacular of Bangkok. I'm also the type of person that goes into a restaurant, looks at a menu, and thinks about how it could have been designed better. So for designers, I know you can relate to me, but for non-designers, I know it must be very annoying, and I'm sorry. So in our office, we joke about this a lot. We call it the designer's curse. So the curse refers to when you see type or design out in the world and you can't ever unsee the problems with it. Like bad kerning, or when you see a store sign and you can tell that the S has been hung upside down. Our intention is not to be overly critical or judgmental, but sometimes we can't help but see how type and design can solve communication issues. So this is a series of posts that we make for Cadson Demak's Facebook page, where we find signs on the street, like the ones in my camera, and we try to make the message clear with type and design. So if the design and language of a sign or a menu is not well thought out, it may miscommunicate things like prices, ingredients, or these unfortunate menus. And so if design and language work together to communicate a message, if there is a mistranslation, then it fails to communicate. And this is a campaign that was shared in our Cadson Demak group chat, which is basically a group of people cursed by the designer's curse. It's a poster from Burger King Japan, and it promotes their new Tom Yum shrimp burger. And can you see what they did to show that it's a Thai-style burger? They put loops in the Latin letters. And I completely understand why. Thai script is very easily recognized by non-natives as the one with circles. But as a native Thai speaker and a designer, we might feel like there are other ways to show Thai-ness that may work better. And this is the logo for this campaign. It's a Thai version of the Burger King logo. And visually, it looks the same, but if you can read Thai, you know immediately what's wrong with it. Actually, what this logo says is more like Burger or King. And the word Burger King is actually separated like the one below. But of course, I understand. Maybe the designers aren't Thai speakers. But what this tells us is that if the language fails to communicate, then we get miscommunication. And so how do we prevent miscommunication through both language and design? So it requires an understanding of the language, its typographic nature, and the local context. And if design, type, and language can work together, then it can communicate effectively. When we translate languages or design, we also consider it in its new context, which leads me to my topic today. How do we adapt a logotype for another language while preserving its design, character, and meaning? So we've worked with a lot of projects of this nature at Samatthaphap, and over time I've noticed that there are some things that I always keep in mind. How do we translate design elements from one alphabet to another when the construction of letter forms are so different? How do we keep the same character of the logotype when the context changes? And how do we make sure that the same meaning is still represented across languages? And of course, we have to consider legibility and readability too. So here I have some examples of what I mean by translated logotypes, or we also call this localization, but there's no official term. So we often see it with consumer products and localized media like movies. At Samatthaphap, we often design logotypes in 2 languages, mostly English and Thai. And sometimes we draw them together at the same time. Sometimes we get the English one and we draw the Thai one, and vice versa. So I want to share with you all from our experiences the design thinking and considerations behind the process of drawing multi-language logotypes. And these are my key considerations. So there are context, naming, letter form, and design element. So first I want to talk about context. So when I say context, I mean where the logotype lives, which means that we have to consider the context of things like culture, language, typography, design, and many other elements. It's kind of like when you go on holiday abroad and you have to consider the cultural context. What is the polite way to greet someone? How should you dress? We also have to be aware of cultural differences. So when I lived in San Francisco, I had a leather jacket, this one. And it was a super cool jacket, and I wore it as an everyday jacket. I wore it to work on weekends. It was my day-to-day jacket. But I took a trip to Seattle wearing this jacket, and someone asked me, "Are you dressed as Jessica Jones?" And to them, my cool jacket looked like a costume because it's so out of place. Because I didn't know, and they didn't tell me, that in Seattle, people wear outdoor jackets, not leather jackets. So like me and my jacket, a logotype should also consider the cultural context so the meaning is not misconstrued. When we translate logotypes, we consider the language, type, and design in its new local context. And most of the logotypes I work with are Thai, so I want to share the Thai context. Like Latin has serif and sans serif, in Thai we have looped and loopless. And international people are often surprised to find that these two styles read exactly the same way. And an important thing to note is that looped and loopless are not equivalent to serif and sans serif. The versatility of the Thai language is that we can choose from multiple styles. And other than these two styles, we also have things like concealed looped and so many more other different styles. The difference between choosing which one is just based on look and feel, cultural context, and perception as a reader. So Thai looped is associated with historical or formal context because it's what we grew up reading in textbooks, it's the style that we're taught to write in as children, it's what we would see in formal documents. But we can also read in loopless Thai because of native familiarity. And this is what we would see in headlines, advertising, and we see as a lot of display text. So here are some older advertising, and we see a lot of loopless text in the headlines of these, and we also see them in modern day advertising like these. So if you're in Bangkok this time and you take a look around, I think you'll notice that most of the type that you see in advertisements and billboards will be loopless Thai. But we also have what is called Latinized, and most loopless Thai fonts are Latinized. So what Latinized means is that it has a similar construction to the Latin letter forms. So here you can see the similarity between the Latin letters in the top row and the Latinized Thai loopless characters in the bottom row. They share similar forms. It is especially useful for setting bilingual texts like these, and we can also take advantage of the similar forms when we draw logotypes translated from Latin. And different Thai classification or styles have different usage, tone, and personality just due to the different context and perception. Certain traits associated with Latin styles of typefaces don't translate the same in Thai. So we associate the Latin black letter with the Bible, metal bands, or newspapers. But the Thai version, Thai Narit, it has similar religious roots, but we associate it with Chinatown restaurants, shops that sell gold, and even embroidery on Thai student uniforms. And another example is the Thai logo for the Fantastic Beasts movie. It was initially designed with looped Thai, and then later on changed to the loopless version. But both are valid translations from the Latin serifs. So the serifs can be either looped or loopless. But the thing that's different here is the tone. The looped version feels more formal, and actually my Thai colleague says it looks like a documentary. But the loopless version, because of its contrast and serifs, makes a display style that looks more magical or fantastical. And in this case, it might be a better representation for the concept of the movie. So when we translate logotypes, how do we balance the importance of keeping the visual or the context consistent? It depends on the logotype and how the brand wants to be perceived. So next, let's talk about naming. Naming is the transliteration. It's writing the brand name in a different alphabet, but keeping the same pronunciation. But do you get the same length or texture? Here, let's look at the Lay's logo. So on the left is the English logo, and on the right is the Thai one. And this is what I would call a really lucky transliteration. And it has similar length, and the Latinized Thai letters have similar shapes, which makes it recognizable as lays even for people who can't read Thai. So you can see that it's so lucky that the first letter in Thai and the L have the exact same shape. And this is what I would call like a pretty good example. Like the word length is close enough, and the shapes are not the same but similar enough, and I can work with it. And lastly, I want to show an unlucky example. And the transliteration is so short, which makes the texture so different, but there's not really much we can do about it because that's the way the word is spelled. And here I have an example of how we can design the name to create a better match. So this is Boss Coffee. It's a coffee beverage from Suntory. And we helped the client to explore the Thai version for this design, but it was not used for actual branding or packaging in the end because they decided to go with the English version. So this is the transliteration of the word boss. As you can see, it only has 3 letters. And because the brand name is so short, the difference between the Thai 3-letter version and the 4-letter English version is quite obvious. So we offered an alternative spelling solution that still reads the same way. We add the second Sase letter at the end. Now we get the same number of letters and the same repeated last 2 letters, which gives it a similar texture and the same length. In most cases, we don't get to choose the name. But as designers of type, we have to consider the language as well. So I think that we should also have the power to suggest a naming solution that will help the design translate better, especially if we have a native understanding of the language and how it will be received in our local context. So now let's talk about letter form. So by letter form, I mean the literal shape of the letters. Are they triangular, round, or square? These Latin letter forms have similar shapes to these Thai ones, and if the logo type has some related characters, it's much easier to see the visual relationship. And let's look at the Uniqlo logo as an example. So in the Japanese version, we have square forms and more rounded forms in the English version, but this is just the nature of these alphabets. And this is something that I consider a lot when we translate logotypes, and I call it natural form versus stylized form. So the English logo here uses the natural form of letters, but it just has the same geometric style as the Japanese. But if we were to put more importance on the visuals, we might get something like this. It's a stylized form that looks visually more similar, but if we consider the tone, maybe the neutral approach is more appropriate for the Uniqlo brand personality. And so there is no right or wrong approach, but we just have to consider what our design choices say. And another thing that we can play with is the case of the logo, which affects the letter forms. We can decide what case to use to get similar shapes. So English has many different cases, and English in all uppercase is usually very straight and blocky. Thai has no case at all, and it usually has a lot more curves. Even looped and loopless Thai have slightly different forms. So in the Pepsi logo, the lowercase English Pepsi gives us rounded forms that can be found in the Thai as well. But what happens when Pepsi rebrands to a logo that's in all caps? We don't get the same rounded forms, and we probably have to redesign these letters to be more square or more bold. And letter form is something we consider in the design process, but sometimes it's beyond our control. We can do the best of our abilities to design letter forms to look similar, but we can't ignore legibility. And lastly, design element. This is the part that makes a logo type different from type design. So logo has to be memorable, unique, and it has to represent the brand. And it requires incorporating other brand elements like visual elements or color, and you also only have a limited number of characters in the logo, which is different from a typeface. So in the localization of the Coca-Cola logo, the name is different. In Thai, this reads as Coke, not Coca-Cola. And even though the length of the word and the letter forms are quite different, it's still recognizable as Coke because of the red color and the swash. So design elements like color, shape, types of serifs, and even this beastly tail is what makes the logo recognizable even in other languages. And sometimes this element can cause problems. Sometimes it's illegible, or it can be mistaken for other letters. Sometimes it looks forced, or sometimes it's impossible to include because of the different letter form construction. So we have to find solutions to include it in other ways if we still want it to be legible. We can't choose what we're given, but as designers, we can use our creativity to find solutions for these unlucky problems. So these are the 4 things that we consider during the design process. And with these, when design, type, and language all work together, our message can be effectively communicated. So now I have some examples of projects that break down our thinking process some more. So the first is Kunit, which is a brand of hot sauce that is popular in the Isan region of Thailand. And the original logo uses a style of type that is associated with the culture of that region, often seen in Thai country folk music or temple fairs, so similar to this kind of style. So what we offered in the rebrand of this logo was a more modern lettering of the original one that still keeps its roots with the looped letter forms and curves. And the brand is expanding to Bangkok, where there is a more international client base, so they also needed an English logo. And this was an interesting project for us because most of the time we get an English logo and we have to translate to Thai, but this was one of the ones where we start with the Thai and we have to translate to English. So what the client asked for was their English logo in all caps. But as you can see, it has a very different letter form construction to the Thai. And even if we use the same italic angle, the same contrast, and the same terminals, the letters are more blocky, they're the same height. There's a lot of diagonal lines that don't appear in the Thai. So we suggested a title case option. So this way, we get a similar up and down rhythm to the Thai, and we get some similar forms in some of these letter forms. So in the na, nu, and the n, these are visually related forms, and we also get similar forms in these pairs of letters. And we get some similar waves or curves in these pairs of letters, and we get similar rounded curves in these pairs of letters. So what we end up with is a bilingual pair of logos that we designed to look visually similar. So this is another project from Suntory as well, and it's Tea Plus, which is an oolong tea beverage. This one right here. So this was the logo that we received from the client, who asked us to draw a Thai version. So if we transliterate the name tea, we get this. But just looking at it, I think you can agree with me that it doesn't really work. It's very short compared to the original logo type. And the T plus is a geometric typeface in all caps. And with this transliteration, there's just not enough letters to express the same geometricness. And also because the Tautahan letter is a rounded letter form. And there can also be confusion with the name of the brand because the plus symbol in Thai we call buak. So we explored alternative naming solutions. The solution we found was to add the transliteration of the word plus. This solves the problem of how to read the brand name, but also gives us more letters to work with. Luckily, we get the addition of the Paul Pan letter, which gives us a chance to use the same shape and point of the A. And we also drew the last two letters, the Laling and Sasua, to have a horizontal stroke like the E and the A. And we drew them with geometric style with rounded shoulders, which is the natural form of these letters. But we also proposed a second option, which is a stylized form. And this actually reflects the straight Latin letters like the T and the E more. And so both options are valid choices. And the client liked both of them, so we proposed the solution to find a middle ground, which actually ended up being the chosen design at the end. And so now we come to the second problem, reading direction. And the original logo reads vertically on the bottle. But as native Thai readers, we find reading vertically to be very strange and unfamiliar. Because Thai has vowels and tone marks that go above or below, it can cause spacing problems when set vertically. And so we offered a solution that was familiar to us, turn the logotype sideways. But the client asked for a vertical solution. So in this context, both logos will exist on the front and the back of the same packaging, which is a bottle. And they wanted the same look and feel. So we adjusted the spacing, and this was the final solution. As native Thai readers, we didn't think the vertical solution would work. But for this word, there are no tone marks above or below that are too tall, so the letter spacing can be solved. So for this naming and this context, it works. From an unlucky transliteration, we can design a lucky solution. And there will be times when our luck is terrible. Maybe we get a design that doesn't translate well, or a transliteration that doesn't have any similar forms, or a graphic element that seems impossible to incorporate. We can't change what we're given, but what we can do is maximize our luck. We can always design a better outcome no matter how unlucky our situation is or what language we're designing in. And the best tool for increasing luck is our ability to be creative, to design, and to problem solve. And it's especially important for our current landscape, where brands are expanding across cultures through globalization and reaching more people than ever by adapting for local regions through localization. Translating logotypes into different languages is not straightforward. It's very difficult to adapt from one language to another while maintaining the same message. It requires a creative approach where we have to consider language, culture, and context. So we should take into account the meaning of the design choices that we make for thoughtful and effective communication. Thank you.